We're back. We're on chapter 17, Black Fortunes. Let's get it. The Trials of Hannah Elias. Hannah Elias passed most of her time reading about murders in dime novels and the newspapers. In September 1901, the murder of President William McKinley by an anarchist in Buffalo, New York, filled the pages of the local dailies. 2 months later, a different scandal arose after his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, was sworn into office and invited Booker T. Washington to the White House. In the headlines of the New York papers, the presence of a black man at the White House was called outrageous. Articles about the meeting quoted South Carolina Senator Benjamin Tillman, who thundered, "The action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that N-word will necessitate our killing 1,000 N-words in the South before they will learn their place again." The same year, Hannah became pregnant and John Platt was presumed to be the father. The following spring, she delivered a baby girl at her home and named her Gwendolyn Elias. On the baby's birth certificate, she listed the child's race as white. By recording Gwendolyn as white, Elias made manifest her hope that her daughter could achieve what Elias was unable to do herself, pass for white. Elias's life, even as a woman of means, was bounded by race. In her view, the only way to escape the limitations that came from being rich and black was to escape being black altogether. Several weeks after her birth, the baby became sick and died. Elias consumed herself in making funeral plans, arranging for an elaborate marble mausoleum to be constructed at her daughter's gravesite. The work totaled $15,000, which is about $422,000 today, and Platt paid the bill. He, however, did not attend the funeral. Having no other friends, Elias paid her staff to attend her daughter's burial. On the death certificate, Elias listed the child's race as black. As she was dead, there was no point continuing to pretend she was white. On Friday, November 13th, 1903, Cornelius Williams stood looking into the mirror of a public restroom in Manhattan, combed his hair, slicked it with pomade, trimmed his mustache with a straight razor, adjusted his gray three-piece suit, and placed a matching bowler hat atop his head. He then packed the razor, a gold-plated watch, and a revolver into his pockets. His mind was made up. Today was the day he was going to find Hannah Elias and take revenge upon her. Elias had evicted him from her boarding house 8 years before, and since then, according to those who knew him, Williams had gone mad. He still carried a grudge against her, and after being evicted from another house a month prior, he had resolved to track her down. When he found her, he was determined to cut her tongue out. However, he hadn't been able to locate Elias. No one at the church or the black social or eating establishments had seen her in years. Williams decided to extract her whereabouts from Platt, whom he knew by his pseudonym, Mr. Green, and with whom he had once had a run-in at Elias's boarding house. Several days earlier, Williams had found a man named Andrew Green in the city directory and had gone to the address of the office listed for him. Leering through the windows at Green's office building, Williams saw an elderly white man with a beard and white hair and was sure he had his man. The man he saw, though, was not Platt. It was the New York City planner, Andrew H. Green. On the morning of November 13th, Williams went to the address listed as Green's residence on Park Avenue and waited for him to show up. Green lived in a townhouse with a covered staircase leading up to a front door of carved stone. When he arrived home at around noon, he found Williams waiting for him on the stairs. As soon as he walked up, Williams began demanding to know Elias's whereabouts. "Who are you anyway? I don't know you. Get away from me," Green shouted at Williams. Williams responded by taking his revolver from his hip pocket and shooting him 3 times, once in the head, once in the abdomen, and once more in the groin. Oh my goodness. Williams took off after the shooting but ran back to the stoop in a panic when neighbors spotted him and shouted for him to stop. Standing over Green's lifeless body, Williams gesticulated and yelled obscenities. "You forced me to do it," he was overheard yelling. After a few minutes, a police carriage pulled up and officers jumped out. Williams told the officer calmly, "I am the man who did the shooting," and pointed to a revolver in his hip pocket. The officer took the gun from him and placed him under arrest. "Officer, this is the man I wanted to shoot, and I done it. I don't want to shoot anybody else. You need not be afraid," he said as the officer wrestled him into the police wagon. They took Williams to the 34th Street police station for questioning. There he was interrogated by Captain Day. He told Day that he had killed Green because he was the lover of a woman who had slandered him. Day asked if Williams had ever been in a mental institution. I have been called foolish sometimes, but never insane. I am not insane, Williams replied, fidgeting with his mustache as his eyes darted up and down. He then posed for a mugshot in his chair. He puffed out his chest, sat up straight as the light bulb went off. That night, Williams slept soundly in a cell. In the morning, he sent out for a hearty breakfast. As he ate, police formed a committee to determine his sanity and assigned detectives to find and question Hannah Elias. On Saturday, November 14, 1903, the front pages of the newspapers across the country carried banner headlines with the news of the murder of New York City's planner by a crazed Negro seeking revenge against Green's black mistress. Throughout New York, flags were lowered to half-mast for the man who had unified the 5 boroughs into one city and overseen the construction of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the American Museum of Natural History, the Bronx Zoo, the New York Public Library, and Central Park. Even as they mourned, though, New Yorkers were shocked that Green had been shot over a black woman. New Yorkers were shocked that Green had been shot over a black woman. On the steps of Green's house, still stained with blood, his nephew addressed a group of reporters attempting to quell the rumors of an interracial liaison. The story that this Negro tells is a perfect humbug and a fiction from A to Z, he told a scrum of reporters. Inspector George W. McCluskey was tasked with finding the woman Williams had spoken of. He discovered Hannah Elias residing in a mansion at 236 Central Park West. He went to her house that morning and was let in by her staff, who led him to Elias sprawled on the sofa in her best Cleopatra pose. She told McCluskey that Williams' statements was a tissue of lies. She then admitted that Williams had lived in her lodging house in 1895, but swore she had never heard from him since he had left. She denied knowing or meeting Green, but told McCluskey that Green resembled a man she had been having an affair with, John R. Platt. The same evening, McCluskey visited Platt at his house to confirm Elias' story. Platt's son-in-law, J.W. Casker, was at the house with Platt and insisted on being present for his questioning. Platt told McCluskey that Elias' story was true, but asked that his affair with her be kept confidential. McCluskey agreed. However, Platt's secret affair had now been revealed to his family. Williams was deemed insane a week after the murder and committed to an asylum. McCluskey, true to his word, kept Platt's affair from reaching the papers. Platt's relatives were another matter. Casker shared the secret with the rest of Platt's family, who became outraged when they found out how much of his fortune, which they stood to inherit, he had lavished on his black mistress. On Tuesday, May 30th, 1904, John R. Platt, under pressure from his family, filed a lawsuit against Hannah Bessie Elias in the amount of $685,000, approximately $18.5 million today, in New York Superior Court. In the suit, which his lawyers from the firm of Warren, and O'Brien published in the local papers, he alleged that Elias had extorted money from him over the previous 8 years. Wow, that's crazy. The lawsuit also requested that all her accounts, which included holdings in 26 saving institutions, 34 trust companies, and 69 banks, be frozen. It also requested that she be prevented from selling any of the 12 properties she owned, including her boarding house in Midtown, her Central Park West mansion, or her rental properties in Upper Manhattan. It had taken months of convincing by Platt's younger brother, Isaac S. Platt, and W.J. Casker to get Platt to sign off on the lawsuit. They convinced me that the woman was determined to ruin not only my reputation in the end, but in the meantime to squeeze all the money possible out of me, he explained. The one concession he demanded from his relatives was that Elias not be arrested. When Elias heard the news, she panicked. She flew into a fit and began barking orders at her servants to run to the banks where she had her holdings and drain her accounts. When they returned later in the day, they told her that they had not been able to get all the money. Collectively, they had come up with $156,000, or approximately $4.2 million in cash. Elias put the money into a sack, gave it to her doorman, Patrick W. Dugan, and instructed him to put it into a safe at his house. After her cash had been hidden, she collapsed and was carried to bed by her servants. Yo. That evening, crowds of angry protesters and onlookers began to gather outside her home, their jeers coming through the walls and windows. One of Elias's servants fetched a chain to reinforce the doors for fear that the crowd might climb the gates and kick them in. As Elias had long feared, the public revelation of a black woman being in possession of such wealth caused outrage. Though some blacks were known to own businesses or work in trade jobs, it was unfathomable that a black woman was living next to millionaires and was perhaps a millionaire herself. Moreover, she was not even a full generation out of slavery. She had been born in the Free Territory of Philadelphia in August 1865, 4 months before the ratification of the 13th Amendment. The day after the suit was announced, Platt's lawyers obtained a civil order for Elias's arrest. They told the judge at the Superior Court that they feared she might flee to Japan with her butler, Cato. The judge granted the order, which was given to a New York City deputy sheriff, along with the mandate for her arrest. When the deputy arrived at her house, he had to push past the crowd to climb the stairs of her home and ring the doorbell. Cato greeted him. The butler apologetically told the deputy that he had to deny him entrance to the house because Elias was ill. The deputy sheriff began shouting at Cato, at which point Washington Barnes, an attorney hired by Elias, arrived at the house and interceded. "There is no reason on earth for trying to arrest my client," he told the deputy sheriff, getting between him and Cato. "She hasn't any idea of trying to get away, and even if she had, she is too ill to do so." After arguing back and forth with Barnes, the deputy conceded that the civil order for an arrest did not allow him forcible entry into the home. Elias could be arrested only on a criminal complaint. For a week after the lawsuit was filed, Elias stayed in her home. Platt's attorney remained frustrated that they were unable to serve her with the lawsuit or the order for a civil arrest. The crowd outside her home was now in the hundreds, and the number having grown so large that it blocked the sidewalk and street, bringing carriage traffic to a halt. As the gathering outside her home grew larger, the prospect of violence loomed. A few days earlier, Cato and 2 black errand boys she employed had been assaulted when trying to leave the house. They had been able to flee back into the home with only a few bruises before things got too out of hand. Afterward, a mounted police detail had been assigned to her block to keep the crowd under control and the streets clear. However, as reinforcements arrived, the crowd seemed to increase by the hour, with one detective putting the number of people gathered at 10,000. Wow. The Elias scandal had been in the paper for days, with writing that Negroes extorted nearly $1 million, and Platt says Elias obtained nearly $700,000 through threats. Not says she threatened him. The ordeal seemed to spark racial outrage and inflame the economic tensions already simmering in the city. Protesting at Elias's house became so popular in the city that men and women were known to pack lunches and bring their children to stand outside her house to hurl profanity and trash at her windows. At 8 o'clock on June 7th, 2 New York assistant district attorneys and a judge went to see Platt in his home, hoping to get him to sign a criminal complaint so that they could arrest Elias. Platt held out until 10 o'clock, finally giving in to the persuasions of the judge, the attorneys, and his family. After they had received Platt's signature, the judge issued a warrant for Elias's arrest on the spot. At 11 that night, detectives attempted to kick down her front door. The door resisted their boots, and one of the detectives sent a deputy to try to find an axe. Before he could return, someone from the crowd offered a heavy metal pipe, which a detective then used to batter the door until it gave in. The detectives rushed inside the house to find it in complete darkness. Cato emerged from the shadows and politely greeted the detectives. "I will take you to her," he said, pointing towards a winding stairwell. Elias was sitting up in bed, still in her nightclothes. "We would have come to the door, but it being such a late hour, we weren't sure what to do," she explained. She told the officer she was prepared to come with them, but needed a few minutes to dress. As she exited the house with the officers, Elias wore a dark dress, a wig of straight black hair pinned into a bun, and a black veil attached to her hat. As she walked to the police carriage, the crowd became raucous, hurling bottles and rocks in her direction. She pressed her face into the arms of one of the detectives to shield herself from the debris. When she arrived at the Tombs, as the city prison was commonly known, and it still is known as that. She could hear screaming outside the carriage and objects breaking against its roof. Flanked by a group of officers, she ducked through another mob into the Tombs, where she was processed and booked just after 2 a.m. on June 8, 1904. From her cell, her screams and sobs could be heard echoing throughout the station. 2 days later, Hannah Elias was to be arraigned on charges of extortion in the New York Criminal Court Building. The night before, she had stayed up all evening in her cell, staring at a threatening letter she had received from the Duquesne Club in Pittsburgh, a social club composed of white male industrialists. She spent hours studying the words scrawled on the paper. It was clear that the scandal of a wealthy black woman alleged to be an extortionist had drawn attention. Elias lived in a mansion off Central Park, outfitted with butlers, maids, and personal chefs from Japan, China, France, and Africa. She owned 3 properties in New York City, in addition to her main home. She had a chauffeur and a carriage, diamonds, pearls, and furs. She had over $100,000, which would be about $2.7 million in cash, and rented a summer home in Long Branch, New Jersey. A rich black woman confounded ideas about blacks and poverty, while the accusations of blackmail against Platt gave support to stereotypes about blacks and criminality. Her story was being covered by newspapers across the country as readers followed along, waiting to see what the conclusion would be. At her arraignment, the crowd in the courthouse grew so large that the doors could barely be shut. Police barricaded the entrances to the courthouse to prevent the thousands gathered outside from forcing their way in. Elias sat at the defense table with her lawyer, Washington Bronze, waiting for the proceedings to start. Across the courtroom was the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney William Rand, who had the look of a man who was assured the outcome would be in his favor. The first witness Rand called that day was John R. Platt. As Platt climbed onto the witness stand, Elias leveled her gaze at him. When Platt shifted in his seat, Elias adjusted her position to fix her stare upon him again. "How old are you?" the prosecutor began. "I am 83 years old. I was born in 1820, Platt replied. "What is your occupation?" "I have no occupation. I was a plate glass manufacturer, but retired years ago," Platt answered. "Do you know the defendant Hannah Elias? And if so, how long have you known her?" "I know her, but I don't know just when I met her. It was a long time ago when the volunteer firemen came here from San Francisco." "You supported her during the last 10 years, District Attorney Rand posed, at which point Elias locked eyes with Platt. "I don't know," Platt said, searching for the right answer. "I have given her large sums of money." "Your relations with her have been more than a friend, have they not?" "Yes." Platt seemed bothered by the question. "Did you give her large sums of money for the last 10 years, running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars?" "I don't know," Platt said. His answer brought a lot of displeasure to Rand's face. "Do you remember bringing action in Supreme Court to recover $685,000? "I don't know," Platt muttered. "Do you remember any of the suit at all?" Rand asked. "I don't know," Platt repeated. "Do you remember signing a warrant charging her with blackmail?" "I think I did." "Do you know what day of the week it is?" Rand asked, growing impatient. "I think so." "Do you know what day of the month it is?" "I don't remember," Platt replied, his answer seeming to throw the prosecutor into a fit of anger. "Do you remember swearing to certain facts in this case the other night in your home?" Rand pounded the table in front of him. "Go easy on the witness," the judge interjected. Rand posed several dozen more questions, to which Platt replied, "I don't know," or "I don't remember," until the prosecutor finally gave up. Elias's attorney declined to cross-examine Platt. A former attorney of Elias's was called, testifying that he had known of Platt and Elias's affair, but had no knowledge of where she got her money. Both of his witnesses had fallen flat. Rand told the judge he had no other evidence to present. Magistrate Ullman spoke up. "I wish to place myself right. The district attorney has not made out the case as he did at the conference at Mr. Platt's house," he said, seemingly apologetic. After scolding the district attorney for his presentation of the case, he looked at Rand and uttered what sounded like a question but seemed to be an order. "Do I understand the district attorney requests the dismissal of the charges against the woman?" "You can put it that the district attorney's office recommends that such course be pursued," Rand conceded. After the case was dismissed, the courtroom adjourned. Platt exited the courtroom first. leaving through the front door, leaning on his cane. Jeers of N-word lover and a cascade of bottles greeted him. Police escorted Elias and her lawyer to a back exit where a carriage awaited. They returned to her mansion, taking back streets to avoid the crowds. Cato was waiting when she pulled up. Elias and Bronze ran up the stairs and shared an embrace with him. Later that evening, Elias invited a rare guest into her home, a reporter from the New York Times. Seated in the parlor of her home, she gave her first public statement. "I don't blame the poor old man at all," she told the reporter. "I know he was forced to bring the suit against me, and he had no choice in the matter of sending out the warrant for my arrest. He never wanted to make trouble for me himself, I am sure of it. I've known all along I would be vindicated as soon as I got a hearing. I never did anything wrong taking the money which he gave me. It's all nonsense. To talk of me having blackmailed him, as he plainly showed himself this afternoon when he refused to say that I extorted money from him by threat." Elias, who had dealt with the angry crowds outside her home for weeks, seemed to reach for consolation in her final words. "I have all my life made white people for friends and never had much to do with my own race." The crowds outside her home shrank each day after the trial until one day, after a few weeks, they were gone altogether. Looking out her window, Elias could see an empty strip of pavement in front of her home and again see the green of the park. She took it as an auspicious sign and hoped that the worst of her misfortunes were over. That is Hannah Elias in 1903. That is John Mott Drew with his sons and bus from the Wills family. And that was chapter 17. Peace. What's good? We are still on Black Fortunes. We are on chapter 18. Let's get it. Black Millionaire Legacy. In August 1918, in a banquet hall by the Atlantic City Boardwalk, Annie Turnbo Malone and Madam C.J. Walker attended the 19th Annual National Negro Business League Conference in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where they were joined by John Neal, an associate of the infamous Hannah Elias, Alonzo Herdon, a black insurance magnate, and Bob Church's son and successor, Robert Reed Church Jr. Together, the black tycoons had a combined net worth of over $6 million, which in today's money would be around $97 million. They were joined by dozens of black entrepreneurs from a growing community of black business people across the country. James Carroll Napier, the late Booker T. Washington's successor as the president of the National Negro Business League, presided over the festivities. Napier had beige skin and wispy white hair. He dressed in 3-piece suits with gold pocket watch chains and spoke with a strong Nashville Southern drawl. The League discussed the grocery business in black communities as well as support for black farms. They discussed the life insurance business and investing in real estate. Chief on the minds of the members of the League as they sat together in the banquet hall was World War I. John Neal, New York's top real estate developer and an advocate of returned World War veterans, listened intently as Napier waxed on about how it was paramount for the efforts of African American soldiers in the war to be publicized. Then the discussion turned to business. Dr. R.R. Martin, an administrator at the Tuskegee Institute, took the floor to submit a plan for how black businesses could take advantage of the more favorable economic conditions presented to them by the war. Later, the group moved to congratulate Annie Malone on the completion of Pearl College in St. Louis, and Madam was briefly given the floor to advocate for a resolution to praise George W. Breckinridge, a white newspaper publisher who pledged $100,000 or $1.6 million to combat lynchers. After Atlantic City, Madam C.J. Walker continued her rise to celebrity. In 1918, the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company brought in about $275,000 or $4.4 million today in revenue, half of which was profit. It had made about $150,000 the previous year. "I have no doubt that you can easily make $500,000 in 1919, her manager Freeman Ransom, wrote Madam just after New Year's of 1919. The previous year, he had told Madam that her expenditures dwarfed her income by almost $200,000 or $3.2 million today, as she has spent $329,000 or $5.3 million roughly building a mansion, Villa Luero, in upstate Irvington, New York. This makes an apparent deficit, which is of course offset by loans, etc. Ransom informed Madam that she had $5,228.27, roughly $84,000, in the bank at the time of the writing. However, the projections for 1919 were looking good, so her coffers would soon be full again. That year, the Walker Company took in $12,000, which would be around $169,000 of revenue in the month of January. That month, Madam went to Tiffany & Co. at 37th Street and 5th Avenue and brought a 3.3 carat solitary diamond set in platinum surrounded by 66 tiny diamonds and matching earrings. The purchase nearly ate up her entire profit for the month. Madam spoiled herself, but she had failed to look after her health. She had developed hypertension and had lived with the ailment for years, but the strain of her frequent travels and the stress of running her company made it difficult to keep her symptoms at bay. 4 months later, in May 1919, just after moving into her upstate mansion, Madam collapsed in her parlor. She died of kidney failure shortly thereafter. At the time of her death, she had a net worth of just over $500,000. After her death, Freeman Ransom decided to publicize that she had been a millionaire. He realized that the future of the Walker Company and estate depended on her memory. He had long realized that women bought Walker's products because they wanted to be like Madam, a slave's daughter who had risen to fame and fortune. Ransom created press releases for black newspapers that implied that Madam had been a millionaire. The tactic worked, and soon the legend began to be repeated as fact. Under Ransom's direction, the company brought in $1 million in a 2-year span from 1919 to 1920, perhaps its most competitive year with Pearl, which did more than $3 million, or $36.6 million of today's money, approximately, of business in the same period. The surge was short-lived as the revenue fell in the 1920s before the Great Depression in 1929 dealt a near-death blow to the company. By 1931, Madam's mansion, Villa Luero, was on the market. Her properties in Indianapolis rented out. The Walker Company was struggling to stay afloat, and her daughter, Alelia Walker, was pawning her jewelry for money. In August 1931, Alelia died of a brain hemorrhage. Like her late rival, Annie became overly concerned with showing off her wealth. In 1920, she made a splash when she bought a Rolls Royce. That year, she made more than $4 million, approximately $48.8 million today, and paid the second highest income tax in the state of Missouri. In 1924, she gave $25,000, approximately $357,000, to the YMCA, where Madam had been able to make a splash with $1,000, approximately $24,000 donation. Outside of the St. Louis press, the gift was largely unreported. Annie grew frustrated by the lack of recognition. She berated her employees, and she and her husband fought loudly in public. In 1926, Aaron filed for divorce and sought half of Annie's empire. In the end, after a costly court battle, she was forced to give Aaron $200,000, which would be approximately $2.7 million. It was the beginning of financial troubles as she spent the next decade trying to spin her way into relevance, giving 6-figure donations to causes only to achieve minimal press coverage. Her out-of-control spending forced her to default on her taxes, and by 1943, she owed $100,000, approximately $906,000, to the IRS, and a lien was placed on her assets. In her later years, Annie continued to struggle over money, and the Pearl Company faded. On May 10, 1957, she died at age 87. In some of the publications that carried the news of her death, she was eulogized as Madam C.J. Walker's mentor. And that was chapter 18.